you are welcome to take a look at those. After our webinar, we usually share out the video as well as slides so that everyone can take a look at those at their convenience. So today we're going to be talking about improving visual literacy skills to increase CASAS test scores. Before we begin, I did want to just take a moment because most of us are in the education field. I know usually we get a few folks in here as well. And I just want to have a short discussion and actually do a word cloud using Menti. For those of you that are familiar, I want you all to try to join us by describing what you think visual literacy is. But here's the challenge. I want you to do it in 5 words or less. The fewer words, the better. This is your challenge today. You can go to the direct link I'm going to put into the chat now. This link is to menti.com. You can just type in menti.com on your device and then use the code 4011132, or you can actually scan the QR code that you see on your screen. So join me in developing our word cloud, talking about what is visual literacy? What does that mean to you? Watching to see if we get any responses, and I'm going to switch over here. And let's take a look at our word cloud. There we go. Oh, I love it. Body language, images, photos, interpret an image, sight comprehension, graphs, language, interpreting data, ability to locate data. I think this means something different to folks in different areas, but I love watching word clouds and how they form and how we get very focused in on things like graphs, charts, and images. I love it. Love the participation here. And I think as we look at this, we can all likely agree that visual literacy is the ability to derive meaning from images. I wanted to share this image because Nick Susani actually created this image, and he became the very first PhD student at Columbia University to actually complete his doctoral dissertation entirely in comic book form. It's really flabbergasting to see. His work is now published under the title Unflattening, but he offered some really valuable and interesting insight to what is visual literacy, and is it much more than just deriving meaning from images? And he uses these comic books to go into even more detail to ask questions like, what if we don't fully understand how our brains process images and text? And that made me ask, what if we don't truly understand how our students are learning? As you stare at this blank screen, I'm asking you, how many other thoughts are racing around in your mind? What else are you thinking about? Whenever I do this kind of applause, I always think of the Alanis Morissette song. Did you think about your bills, your ex, your deadline, or when you think you're going to die? Or did you long for the next distraction? And I'd love to see in the chat, what things are you thinking about at the same time that you're watching this webinar? Anyone on a treadmill today? Aha, organizing things into columns and rows. I love it. I think it's important for us to take a moment to say, how do we look at the world? When we take in information, what information are we taking in? So what do you see here? And I'm actually going to share this image so you can take a closer look at it. If I go into the chat right now, I'm going to put in a link, and if anyone needs to just get a closer look at this, take some time to really view it and see if this is something that means something different. Just observe how you're looking at the link and how you're looking at the image. And it's coming into the chat right now. And Greg, if anyone misses out on that link, if you could copy and paste it for me, I would appreciate that.
Will do.
Chat. This will give you an opportunity to pull this up on your own device and actually take a closer look and see what you see. This is another Nick Susani image. See what you notice. Did you read it first? Are you looking at the pictures first? I knew Greg would say that he was wondering what he's going to have for lunch. Did you forget to turn off the coffee maker this morning? Are all of these thoughts going through your mind at the same time that you are looking at this image and maybe even trying to take a look at the text? Some people go for the pictures first, some go for the text first. Most of us are actually, whether we realize it or not, taking all of that information in all at once. So what do you think your students do first? What are they thinking about as you're standing in front of them and lecturing? Good, I love the chat. I love the participation. Greg, of course, said lunch. Again, I knew it. Lunch and learn, that's why we call it that. So what do you see here? Now I'm putting this image up here because I think it's very important as people are looking at something this simple or not simple, might not realize how much your prior experiences have to do with how you perceive these images. Some languages use text that is similar to these images. Does it remind you of any experience? Kindergarten, maybe. I shared this image with my son and he said, PlayStation. He automatically thought of a controller, which I thought was interesting. And does anything in this bring up a feeling? So it's really important to think about the senses that we are touching on when we're introducing these types of images into our teaching. And when I share this with you, I'll bet it completely changes what you're thinking about. And I love seeing the feedback because so many people are sharing so many different things. So does that circle really represent soil? Does that triangle represent water in your mind? Does that square represent an archaeological site in your mind? And when you put it into this gobbledygook for your students, does it make sense to them? And how can we make sense of this image for our students? All right, so how can we prepare learners for exams like CASAS that involve so many images? And I noticed on our first word cloud how many of you said graphs and charts. So I really want to focus in on that. One of the things that I used to do in my teaching was to use slow reveal graphs. And with copyrighted permission from New Readers Press, I would actually share images directly from the score boosts that I was using. So with my students, before I even handed out a workbook, I would put something in there and I would show some images to them in slow reveal graph form. And what slow reveal graphs do is they purposefully, slowly, and intentionally reveal images, text, and data to help students learn to identify key pieces of information to improve their visual literacy skills. Things that they normally overlook when taking the information in all at once now become valuable as we train their brains to notice more and therefore create more meaning from the information in the image. Let me show you a couple of examples. And before you ask, I'm not just going to show you examples, I'm also going to show you how to build these slow reveal graphs using images you can find online. I'll make sure to show you some resources for slow reveal graphs that are already built. And then of course we can take it to the next level as well. But this is just one way to help build visual literacy with our students. So here's an example. When you look at this, can you identify this? Will your past experiences possibly affect your perception of this image? At first glance, you might think it's one of those safety handlebars in your shower. As you're getting older, I have those everywhere in my home. When you look at this image, now you see two of these. Does that change your perception? Does it make you think that maybe we're going to make a comparison here? And as I slowly give you more and more information, do you notice more things? This is one of the things that I would do with my students. And then as the information is revealed, I'm even going to point out some hidden information. For example, what's underneath the bold print where it says degrees in Fahrenheit. You don't want students to miss that information because the question might be in Celsius, even though the image shows Fahrenheit. So they might have to, they might be required to use some mathematics. When I add this information in, am I dealing with integers? Here's another example of a slow reveal graph that can be used for visual literacy. This is a common example shown up on the CASAS exam medication models. As we put pieces of information in, absolutely no refills. What's the date on the bottle? Is that an important date? Are there side effects? How soon do I have to use this?
Interesting question, sis. Robin asks, do you ask them after each reveal what they think they're seeing, and do they discuss it?
Absolutely. In fact, in the next sample, I actually go into more detail to talk about the types of questions that you'd want to ask. So when we look at this, we all have prior knowledge, right? Some students might, they might not. Some students might see this image and think of spokes on a bicycle. So it's always important to take the time to pause and discuss and point out what might be important. It's really the whole point is to force your brain and train your brain to identify pieces of information one by one, rather than looking at the image as a whole and your mind being bombarded by all of that information at once. So we're actually helping to train these students to look for important information, because they start to realize as you do this, what kind of chart is this? Why are pie charts used? When are pie charts used? So we can start asking key bits of information. It's almost like you were there for my segue, Robin. I love it. What do we notice about the pie chart already? Go ahead and put in the chat. What do you notice already without any other information being in here? What do you see? Shading variations is one of the responses. Good, it's divided into 6 sections. Differently shaded, 6 sections. I love it. I might ask as an instructor, are any of the sections bigger than other sections? Are they all equal? And then as I progress through this and add information, I'm going to say, well, what do we know now? Is this a bounce house play area? Or does the word credit have more importance? Do we know yet? Do we have enough information? And now, who in the world is Najee Lyons? Do we know? Does it matter? Is it important? And can we make inferences now about what the pie chart represents? What do we guess that each color might mean? Haha. Spending habits is something that jumped in there. Credit card charges. I love it. Now let's take a closer look. I'm going to release information one by one so we can really point out and break down. 32% groceries. Robin says somebody wants my money. I love it. 12% dining, 8% gas, 19% entertainment. Shopping is 11%, and 18% miscellaneous. So now that we have all of the information, the students can actually use their critical thinking skills before being distracted by the questions. So as I shared earlier, at this point, I'm putting images up either on my overhead projector or on my screen to share if I'm teaching remotely. And I'm going through all of this before I've actually handed them the Score Boost for CASAS book. Then we look at the question. I would often do multiple images. All three of the images I've shared so far have actually been taken from this particular Score Boost. Of course, I did so with explicit express permission from New Readers Press, which you can request by going to nrp@proliteracy.org if you are interested in building some of your own graphs from our products. So just so you know, these are pulled directly from the Score Boost for CASAS. I even include in the slide the level that it was from and the page that these are from. The next graph that I want to show you is a timeline. Students often struggle with timelines. And so as we slowly reveal information for this, you're going to notice how important those headings are. We're going to be getting the students to pay close attention to the bold information. We also want to be sure to have them pay close attention to the direction that this builds. So as we look at, well, what are these numbers? It's only 1954 to 1968. And as we work from left to right, we start to understand what the timeline is representing. So they can see different progressions through time and major events through time. This particular graph was shared directly from our visual literacy book. We have a great set of visual literacy Score Boosts, love them. And here's one more also from those books. This one specifically from maps, photographs, and editorial cartoons. So as I add information to this, one of the challenges students often have is with maps. And I can ask questions. Notice the thing that just jumped in here was the source. That's something a lot of students don't notice or even pay attention to. And we want to make sure that they start to pay attention to those sources because that can often help them answer the questions on CASAS exams or even high school equivalency exams. And of course, the bold print, always important. And the keys that come up on maps are something that we want to be sure students fully understand the shading and the coloring that comes into the keys. This was pulled from our visual literacy maps, photographs, and editorial cartoons. And my last little reveal graph here is actually to show you, you can even do this with political cartoons, which is something that so many high school equivalency students struggle with. It's one of the most missed questions on the HiSET exams and GED exams. So here's an example, and obviously I've blocked out information here. So this isn't quite as pretty as the other graphs that I've done so far, but it does allow you to take a closer look at, okay, who do we see in the image right now? What are we noticing? What is that on his back? And even paying close attention to what kind of a hat is he wearing? And pointing out to students, hey, that looks like a graduation cap. What could that possibly be on his back? And then revealing different characters within the cartoon slowly. This is an image that you might have even missed if you were looking at the whole cartoon completely, but now you're actually going to be paying closer attention and maybe even noticing some of the symbolism in this cartoon. And as I continue to share information, at this point, we have zero text, all images. We can talk about, well, what do we think this means? What could it be? What does it come from? What is the title of it? The title of it is student loan debt. Does that now mean more to us as we look at this? And now as I share the text that's included in this political cartoon, aha, 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 does this mean more to us now? So having this key piece that the artist shared with us, we can even talk about things like sarcasm and symbolism in political cartoons as we break it down for the students in pieces. Notice the pacifier. I love it. Shirley paid such close attention. She noticed the pacifier here. Excellent. That is one big baby. I also wanted to point out the hat. And what does that symbolism represent? If you're interested in some of these images, you can go to our visual literacy series and take a look. And the next thing I'm going to do is actually show you how to build your own slow reveal graphs. Now, there are several ways to do this. This is just the trick that I use to make these. They typically take me about 15 or 20 minutes. So let's talk about how to build your own slow reveal graph. Now, I used to do this in Google Slides. I am now using PowerPoint, and I can say the most important thing is how you choose your image and increase the size of the photo to make it manipulating it easier. You're going to insert shapes to replace the text one by one. And when you're looking for an image to use, be sure you pay close attention to if it has a simple design, is it going to be easy to modify, and what are the key lesson features that I want to point out. Each time you're going to include something here, you're going to recolor the shapes to match the image. And note that the eyedropper tool actually allows you to match the color perfectly. So when you're using PowerPoint, you can go to the shapes icon and you'll have a drop down and you can choose which shape you need to fit into your image. Notice I have a triangle here that covered up this first piece of information, and it's differently colored. But when I use that eyedropper and I change the fill, I can then make it match perfectly to what is specifically in the image already. When you're done with that, you can duplicate that slide so that you're keeping that piece of information. And I like to work backwards, where I would actually go to the top slide and then leave the one towards the bottom that I just made. That way, as I continue to eliminate information, I'm building backwards. So to duplicate the slide, you would actually click on the slides on the left and go down to, by right-clicking and going down to duplicate slide. And then you're going to repeat that process to hide the text piece by piece, like so. And then once complete, you can reverse the order of the slides to slowly reveal the text. This is just slowly walking you through the shapes that are being used and then disguised. I put a shape in and disguise it. And I always try to focus on the last piece of information being one of the most important. Notice with this one, I made sure to do the source last, because that's something I wanted to focus on with my students to make sure they were really paying attention. A lot of information in this particular image is in that source. It actually tells me, what is this entire graph going to be about? And then as I release it backwards, it's going to build slowly, one by one, back the way we came. Now I have one last final slow reveal graph to share with you. Are there any questions at this point?
There were just a few, and I think I answered them in the chats, Sis. How do we get permission from New Readers Press to do this to the graphics? You would contact either customer service or your state rep from New Readers Press, and we would put you in touch with our chief editor, who has the power to grant permissions. And it would be explicitly to share this with learners, but not make copies for distribution. But we're always willing to work with folks, and especially now when it's so important to share information in Zooms and on Google Chat and in Google Rooms and such for instruction. We want you to use our resources. So just reach out to customer service or your your state representative, and we'll help you make that happen.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that.
And does New Readers Press have already made PowerPoints that we can use? No, it is an interesting idea. I think I'll take credit for that one and throw it up at our next meeting and say, hey, I just had this brilliant thought. And if it gets shot down, I'll say, oh, just kidding. It's somebody else recommended that on a webinar. But no, it is an interesting idea. But sadly, we don't. But these kinds of things are growing in popularity, and so I can't wait to see how to do this for myself.
And I wish that I had specifically known when I was teaching about slowrevealgraphs.com. I wish I had stolen that idea myself and branded it and had it already, because I would have loved to have done that. There is a website out there where you can get some open education resources. So I do share some of those in my final slides today. So there are some pre-built, just not by New Readers Press necessarily. This next image I actually took from News for You Online. If you're not familiar with this website, I'm just going to pop in there really quickly to show you how one of the things I love about this particular site, and you can order these in print, so they are exactly like news articles, and you can get them in print, or you can go to News for You Online. But this weekly poll that pops right here in the top every week is something that you can share. And this is a great way to work on that, because you can take this information and just for fun, I'm a big fan of Google apps. And so I went in and I got into my Drive and I created a Google sheet for this particular information. And I thought, if I were in class, here's what I would do. I would be taking a poll within my own classroom that matches this News for You Online. So I would be asking my students, do you celebrate St. Patrick's Day? And then I would put that into a Google Sheet and we could put their answers in here. And this is actually one of the fun ways, because you can share this with all of your students while you're teaching remotely, and they can all get in there at the same time. Or you can make copies of this and put it into your learning management system and share it. But what you can do with either Excel or Google Sheets is you can actually insert charts. And so if I go to insert chart and I click on this, what it's going to allow me to do is to create different types of charts and graphs based on the data here. Oh, this says I have no data. I did not highlight. So let me highlight what I have here, click insert and chart. And now I'm going to have a pie chart. If I go to the right here, I can choose what type of graph I want to use to take a look at different things here. I can go with what's recommended for yes and no, so we can make comparisons. But what I love about doing this sort of thing in class is you're now taking the opposite direction. You're taking the data and the information that's being shared and turning it into that visual imagery or that visual format. So just a thought of a way to use News for You if you aren't already. The other thing you can do is in News for You, you can click back here on View last week's poll results. And when you click on that, there's the image right there. So you can even look every Monday morning and take a look and say, oh, hey, let's look at last week's poll, and use that to increase your students' visual literacy skills. You can even go into the archive in News for You, where you can reach every article. I know there's one that was back here that Greg shared with me on February 2nd that was an actual poll. So if I click on this particular article, this is where this image came from. And it's a poll on education, friendships, dating, and how they're harder for young people. But if I go back to my slow reveal graph, here's all you see right now. And as I pop through this one by one, now I have the percentages. Doesn't mean much to me yet. As I build into each piece, keeping up mental health, having fun, keeping good friendships, romantic relationships, career or education, I still might not necessarily have any idea what this whole chart or graph is about. And as I continue to proceed by adding source information, the title, pandemic stress, boy, do we all know what that feels like. And the last piece, which is how I intentionally built this slow reveal graph, was the description, where it actually says, here are percentages of each generation who said the COVID-19 pandemic made things more difficult. So by selectively choosing what's first and what's last, I'm actually able to really point out how you really need to look at each individual detail before trying to answer any questions. Again, there's a key that is a really, really important piece of information. Now I know what all of that color coding means. Yes, I know it's generation. Now I can specifically say it's Generation Z, Millennials, and Generation X. Great source from News for You Online. In case you're interested, I have included all the slides in here, as well as links to different studies where this information came from. Here's a couple of sites. This is the one I was talking about, slowrevealgraphs.com. As we're ending our 30-minute point here, this is a site that has now been created. Gosh, I wish I could have patented this idea. And there are many free resources in here for you to take part in. Of course, I've also included ways to take visual literacy a step further, because one of my favorite things to do is to use, and this is one of my favorite sites here, Information is Beautiful. They have tons and tons and tons of interactive graphs. So if I wanted to go into any one of these, here's one I'm fairly familiar with. Each one of these has just a plethora of graphical information that you can interact with. So as you get into each of these, you're interacting, you're finding information, you're moving around and clicking on the information. You can go into each one of these various forms of information to be able to teach your learners how to read different types of charts, graphs, and visual data. Visual data is actually a field that's changing significantly, and it's really coming to the forefront now. So very important to take a look at that and share that with students. Of course, there's resources for you on our site. And then I always try to make sure everyone knows how to get a hold of their state sales rep if you are interested in any one of these products. I'm going to put this into the chat so you can actually find your sales rep and get in touch with them. And of course, you are always welcome to get in touch with us. This is my contact information. Greg, it's first letter, last name at ProLiteracy.org. And my name is Rachel Budde. Do we have any final questions for our Lunch and Learn webinar today? Thank you for joining us, Mary.
Great information, sis, as always. Actually, I was captivated the whole time. I really like this. Makes me want to get back into the classroom myself.
I'm always inspired by this. I feel the same way. Thanks for joining us, Jen. Thanks for joining us, everyone. I hope everyone has a great day. I'm sure Greg is hungry, and I know we are ready to join another meeting ourselves. So thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day and take care.
So long, everyone. Thank you.